Hey guys, welcome to our first video on bone tissue, probably number one of two. We're going to talk about some basics about bone, what it consists of, what it does. We're leaving the names and the parts of the bones for lab. Maybe you've already started looking at the lab videos of the skull. Maybe not. So, what do we have here? Obviously, we got a skeleton. Beautiful skeleton. Right there, leaning on a shovel, perhaps. So I'm not so concerned about what the skeleton is doing in this picture, but I want to know what functions the skeleton serves. And there are a bunch. Got 4 S's and a PMH. So what are some things the skeleton does? Well, it is going to give our body structure. It is going to give our bodies, it's going to give us form. It's going to give us structure. It is going to give us form. It is going to support our weight. It's going to give us support. It is also going to do some storage. If I can get this thing to type for me. There we go. It's going to do some storage. One thing we're going to store is minerals. And when I'm talking about minerals, what I'm really talking about here are calcium, of course, and phosphorus, 2 essential minerals. What else? You know what? Another storage. We're going to store energy. And of course, how do we store energy? We store energy in the form of adipose tissue. In other words, in the form of fat. Let's keep going. What else are we going to do with bone? With our skeletal system, in fact. It is going to provide protection. Think about it. Ribs and the sternum are going to protect the heart and the lungs. Bones of the skull are going to protect the brain. All right, we got our S's taken care of. Let's do our NRP as well, I guess. Let's do our M. The M, of course, is movement. You may think of movement as belonging to the muscular system, but if muscles don't have something to pull on, they're not going to work very well. Bones are going to be the levers that muscles pull upon. So that's our M, and our H is the easiest one of all. You guessed it. It is hematopoiesis. That means the synthesis of blood cells. So inside your bone marrow is where you're going to make red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. So the word for that generation of blood cells is hematopoiesis. Okay, awesome. Let's keep going and talk about some basic classifications of bone tissue. I am looking at a femur here. This femur is cut in frontal section. And in this view, we can see the outside has this layer of compact bone. That is one type of bone tissue. And in fact, it's going all the way up here. It gets pretty darn skinny up here. It's nice and thick down here. And compact bone is one type of bone tissue. Compact bone is going to be solid when you look at it with your naked eye. Now, that is going to be different from spongy bone. This is all spongy bone in here. When you look at spongy bone with the naked eye, it has spaces. Those spaces are going to be occupied by marrow. We'll talk about the 2 types of marrow soon enough, red and yellow. And then there are little pieces of bone in here. You can kind of see them nicely right in here. Like the little honeycomb part of the bone. Those little pieces are called trabeculae. They're called trabeculae. All right, let's zoom in a little bit and switch to a cartoon drawing. This is our compact bone on the outside here. Compact bone here. This is our periosteum out here. Or maybe it's some cartilage. Either one doesn't matter. This is our compact bone right here. You can probably see some osteons in here, some central canals with which you're familiar. Then this in here is spongy bone. These pieces of bone in here, they are known as trabeculae. So those pieces of bone, they are called trabeculae, each of these guys here. Okay, let's look at a bridge. We're going to use this bridge as an analogy of why we have trabeculae. When we looked at trabeculae, we see these connections between each other and these spaces. When we look at this bridge, there we go, we see the same thing. We got connections and we have spaces. Well, these connections are going to allow for a really good distribution of force. They're going to help maintain the proper tension and compression in the bone. Plus, by having just pieces here, we are limiting the amount of weight, we are limiting the amount of materials and energy we have to spend. So spongy bone's pretty amazing. Here is a flat bone here, and we got compact, and we got spongy in the middle. We see the interconnecting trabeculae with the spaces for marrow left over. All right. When we're talking about bone, and this is going to be reminiscent of the lab number 9 video if you've seen that one, there are 4 basic types of bone: long, short, flat, and irregular. Long bones have a length much greater than its width. Classic example right here, the femur. Classic example, very long, not very wide. In fact, almost all of your appendage bones, so almost all of your limb bones, are going to be long bones. So the bones in your arm, forearm, your hand, finger bones, even the littlest pinky bone is a long bone because of that length to width ratio. Toes and feet, the same thing. The only exceptions are the wrist bones. So we know we have bones in our wrist. The bones in our wrist, which I see right here, there are 8 of them in each wrist. They are not long bones. They're actually short bones, and the group of them is called the carpals. Similarly, there's a group of there's a group of 7 short bones in the ankle, and they are called the tarsals. So we got these guys, they're exceptional, plus your kneecaps, and we know the better word for a kneecap is a patella. But all your other bones in your limbs are long bones. And the length of a long bone lets the muscles pull on it, and it acts like one of these. It acts like a lever. You know from physics class that there are different types of levers that can be used to try and maximize the amount of mass you're moving or the speed with which you're moving something. And our long bones do this for us in our limbs as they act as levers. All right. Good deal. Let's clear all that. Let's advance that slide and talk about those carpals and those tarsals. So right here, we have our 8 carpal bones. The scaphoid, the lunate, the triquetrum, the pisiform, the trapezoid, the hamate. I don't know if I said all of them, the capitate. Anyway, you're not going to learn all of them in 4 lab, don't worry. So our carpals plus our tarsals. Tarsals are 7 of them. In the ankle, there's the calcaneus, the talus, the navicular, the cuneiform, the cuboids. And we're not learning all of them either. We're learning a couple of each in lab, okay? So these are short bones. They're roughly cuboidal. And as I say, the emphasis is on the roughly part. Because you look at some of these and you'll be like, dude, that is not cuboidal. And I'll be like, yeah, you're right. I agree. But hey, this is how we classify them. So be it. All right. 2 down. Let's do another category. Another category is the flat bones. Good flat bone is your scapula, which we got right here, your sternum right here, and a nice beautiful rib right here. Plus bones like, for example, your parietal bone on the side of your head. All flat bones. Flat bones tend to be thin, tend to be flat, of course, tend to be kind of curvy. Often they are very much involved in that crucial function of protection. Skull bones protecting the brain, thoracic bones protecting the heart and the lungs. Okay. Last but not least, irregular bones. They just kind of don't fit the other three categories. So bones like the sphenoid bone. If you've already started lab number 9, you know a bunch of these parts of the sphenoid bone, like these legs down here, for example. Plus a vertebra. Vertebrae can't fit in the other three, so they're irregular. This is a beautiful lumbar vertebra from your lower back. We will learn all these parts on it soon enough, don't worry. All right. So we're going to talk briefly about long bone structure. And we've touched on this in lab number 9. We're going to go into a little more detail here in this bone lecture. Now, the long bone basically has 3 parts. It's got a shaft in the middle. The shaft in the middle is called the diaphysis. So I boxed it in purple there. And then at each end we have a rounded end that is going to be the epiphysis. And since long bones are in our limbs, we're always going to have a proximal, there's a proximal one, and a distal epiphysis. Since they're in the limbs, we can always use these terms to describe our epiphyses. To do the plural, you just take away that I right there and you make it an E, and it's epiphyses. Now, let's talk about these words for a minute here. I like talking about words. I don't know about you guys, but I like talking about the words. Notice that there's this common ending. It's really a common, not really an ending, but the main chunk of the word. There's the prefix epi or the prefix dia, and then there's this physis here. Physis, this part of the word, means growth. Okay? Physis, kind of hard to say that, means growth. Epi, and we know epi is going to mean like outside of, on top of, beyond. Dia means between. So I got epi, which I'm going to say means outside. And I got dia, which is going to mean between. All right, this is going to make total sense, I hope. So, do you see this little space I left in here? I left a little space right there. That is basically, and I'm cheating a little bit. It's okay. That is basically where bone growth happens. That is where you would find a growth plate. Right in that area right there, more or less. Okay? That's where you'd find a growth plate. So the epiphysis is the part of the bone on the outside of that growth area. Epiphysis. Epiphysis, on the outside of that area of growth. And then between the growth areas, look at that, between the growth areas is the diaphysis. Okay, that is how we get those words. All right, let's not stop. Let's keep going. Because long bones, one of their characteristics is an internal cavity in their diaphysis. So we are looking at the diaphysis of a long bone. Maybe it's the diaphysis of the tibia. I don't really know. But in this diaphysis, you got a collar of bone and in a space, a cavity. In adult long bones, that cavity is occupied by yellow bone marrow. This is yellow bone marrow. Yellow bone marrow, here it is right here. It is, what do we see here? We see adipocytes. If we have adipocytes, we know we have adipose tissue. We know we are storing fat. In other words, we are storing triglycerides. And why are we storing fat? For energy. So that's why we have fat, for energy storage in our medullary cavity, in our yellow bone marrow. If we are adult humans, if we are referring to a non-adult human, then things get a little bit trickier. When you are a tiny baby, so 0 to 1, tiny little thing, you have basically entirely red bone marrow in that diaphysis. When you're in your good single-digit years, maybe like 1 to 10, you have mostly bone marrow, but you're starting to get some yellow marrow in the middle, getting some yellow marrow at the epiphyses. As you get through that second decade, so 10 to 20, so you're a preteen, then you're a teenager, fun times. We all know the body is changing as a teenager. One of the changes happens is in the bone marrow. It is going through a conversion from yellow to red until by the time you're an adult, in your long bones, you're almost entirely yellow marrow. The only exception is the proximal end of the femur and the humerus. The other ones would totally be yellow. All right. Yeah. Let's keep going, guys. No rest at all. So, let's talk about those epiphyses, those expanded ends. Here I got the epiphysis of the humerus right there, cut open. The epiphysis of the humerus right here as well. Jump up here, there's the epiphysis of the humerus and epiphysis of the radius and the ulna. Epiphyses are going to be where my long bones make articulations or joints. And for that reason, we need a more flexible tissue covering the bone there. A more squishable, more flexible tissue. And you know what does that perfectly for us? Hyaline cartilage. On our epiphysis, at our joint surfaces, we are going to have good old hyaline cartilage, which you remember from lab number 5. So that is hyaline cartilage right there. It is sometimes referred to as articular cartilage because it is the cartilage at this movable joint here. It is more squishy and more flexy than bone, so we put it there. So we have this outer layer of hyaline cartilage at the joint surfaces. If we look on the inside, again, we got that collar of bone, compact bone, then the sponginess, and then in adults, we have a line of compact bone running across the epiphysis. This is called the epiphyseal line. It is the site where growth used to happen. We used to have a growth plate there. And we'll take a look at that growth plate in a second. But what happens when you're done growing, that growth plate turns from cartilage, it used to be cartilage, turns into a line of bone. So I know this is an adult bone that I'm looking at here because I see my epiphyseal line and I see yellow bone marrow in that shaft. 2 good clues. Okay. If we look at some kid bones, so this is a cartoon of a kid bone here. This is the epiphysis. So we got spongy bone, compact bone, and then this is hyaline cartilage right here. That is hyaline cartilage. That is the growth plate. That is where long bones grow in length. I've said growth plate a bunch of times. The better word is epiphyseal plate. If we look at this real section of a child bone here, this is bone tissue on both sides here. And then this guy right here is the epiphyseal plate. If you look at an x-ray, you can see it on an x-ray as well. And so you can look at an x-ray and say, am I done growing? Do I still? Can I get a couple more inches? All right. Good, 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 good. Let's talk about the rest of the outside of our long bone. So we know the joint surface is covered by articular cartilage, which of course is hyaline cartilage. Everywhere else is covered by the good old periosteum. We met this membrane when we looked at the bone model in lab number 5. Now, if we zoom in on the periosteum, so here's my compact bone here, and then here's my periosteum. We're going to notice it has 2 layers. It has an outer layer called the fibrous layer. It's called the fibrous layer because it is filled with fibers. In fact, it is good old dense irregular connective tissue. Dense telling me there are a lot of collagen fibers. And collagen fibers, of course, are really, really strong. And I need this strength because ligaments are going to grab onto the periosteum. Tendons are going to grab onto the periosteum. And they're going to pull on it with immense force. Now, the inner layer of the periosteum, the cellular layer, or the osteogenic layer, whichever you prefer. I like osteogenic layer, but they're both good. Cellular layer because it's made of cells. This little arrow here is, or bracket rather, is off a little bit. It should be right there. There we go. Where was I? Osteogenic layer. Yeah, filled with cells. The majority of the cells in the osteogenic layer are these cells called osteoblasts. Now, as you probably already guessed, osteogenic, osteobone, genic, generate, genesis. Think about that. This is the bone creating layer. This is where we're going to have bone making cells called osteoblasts. Osteoblasts are going to make bone matrix. This lets the bone get wider, get thicker, especially at points of stress, points where it needs to be stronger. If you stress your bone, if muscles pull on your bone, the bone will respond by growing more bone in those spaces. If you want strong bones, you're going to exercise, you're going to lift weights, resistance train, because you will pull on that bone with those muscles and you will strengthen that bone. All right. Cool. Let's keep on going. Yeah. There's also the lining of the spongy bone on the inside. It is called the endosteum. And we're going to see osteoblasts in here as well, making bone matrix, as well as this big, beautiful, multinucleate cell who is known as an osteoclast. So the osteoblast is the bone maker. The clast, this guy right here, is the bone breaker. He secretes enzymes and acid. Enzymes and acid go this way and break down the bone matrix. You might say, well, why do I want to do that? Well, I just talked about exercise, and exercise helps you build strong bones. You're not just adding more bone tissue in response to stresses, you're remodeling the bone. You're knocking down walls in some places and building new ones in others. So you got to be able to take away bone in your remodeling, and osteoclasts, which are abundant in the endosteum, lining the internal spongy bone. So I'm talking spongy bone in the diaphysis of the, lining the medullary cavity. I'm talking in the epiphyses. You're going to find osteoclasts. All right. By the way, check out just how much surface area he has with all these sticky out pieces. More surface area means he is going to be better at secretion. We've seen that sort of thing before. Okay, let's keep on going and let's talk a little bit about bone matrix. We just said osteoblasts make it, osteoclasts break it. Bone matrix has got two major components. About a third of it is this stuff called osteoid. Basically means bone stuff. It's the collagen and the ground substance, like the scant amount of liquid that we have in this connective tissue. This gives our bone flexibility, but it's hard to pull it apart. So collagen, you can bend it, but it's hard to pull it apart. But we need more than the ability to resist tension. We also have to resist compression. We have to have bone be hard in order for it to be protective. And the other 2/3 of bone is this stuff called hydroxyapatite. That is the mineral part of bone. And we have calcium phosphate and calcium hydroxide. So if I'm looking at this bone matrix here, a third of it is collagen, 2/3 of it is mineral. The mineral part is hydroxyapatite, which are my two calciums, calcium phosphate and calcium hydroxide. That provides the hardness and resists the compression, whereas the collagen is going to give us flexibility and is going to resist tension. Good analogy is pouring concrete over steel rebar. This combination of having the steel rebar and the concrete is going to give us the ability to resist tension and compression and to be nice and hard and sturdy. That's what we want in our bone. All right, one final question here. And of course, this is an extra credit question. Send me the answer. This bone right here, it's a human fibula, so your lateral leg bone. It was soaked in vinegar. You can do this experiment at home if you want. You could soak a bone in vinegar, like a chicken bone right there, for a couple days or so. Don't tell anybody why you're doing it. Just do it. Put it on your kitchen counter. Take like an old jar or glass, whatever. Stick a bone in it. Put some vinegar on it. Don't tell anybody why you're doing it, okay? And what this is going to do, it's going to make the bone very bendy. You can tie a knot with your fibula. You shouldn't normally be able to tie a knot with your fibula. So my question for you, and this is an extra credit question, is worth a gigantic 2 points. Take it or leave it. Email me the answer to this question by Sunday, the 27th of September. What's the answer? Is it A or is it B? Or if you want, C or D. All right. Don't choose C and D. There's no answer there. So that's where we're going to end today with this video. And I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.